Okay, so the scene is uh, Brussels.
Yeah.
The tension is just palpable.
Right.
And you've got White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt launching this, well, full frontal attack on Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Trade, defense. Yeah, she didn't hold back.
Came out guns blazing.
Ah!
But what happened next? Well, let's just say Carney delivered a counterstrike that really echoed. You could feel it in the room.
What's really striking, I think, is how this press briefing, which maybe seemed routine, just rapidly escalated.
Yeah.
It became this really critical moment in the Canada-U.S. relationship.
Definitely.
And we have the details right here from the text provided. Our goal today is, well, to get beyond just the headlines.
Right, deeper.
Exactly. To really dissect the core arguments, pinpoint those turning points, the moments that really change the dynamic.
Can figure out what it all means, right, for Canada, for its relationship with the U.S.
Precisely. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding this really pivotal geopolitical event.
So let's paint the picture. You're in this classic Brussels conference hall.
Elegant setting.
Very elegant, but underneath, you could just feel this unease. All the flags are there. Canadian, EU, Japanese, Australian.
Kind of a visual reminder, isn't it, that this isn't just about two countries?
No, it's bigger. And then you see these stark visuals, these graphs showing the 25% U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods.
Oof. Yeah. Right after a summit that was supposed to find common ground.
Exactly. So the air was just thick with anticipation.
Yeah.
Like, what happens now?
And that contrast is key, isn't it? The formal setting versus this, well, blunt economic pressure.
Absolutely. Then you have the main players. Prime Minister Carney.
Known for being calm, right?
Yeah.
That financial background.
Yeah, very measured. And then Secretary Leavitt, the voice of that America First approach.
Yeah.
Very assertive.
Their styles couldn't be more different, really. Sets the stage perfectly for a clash.
And Leavitt, I mean, she wasted zero time.
Yeah.
Her opening shot was basically Canada's pushback.
Yeah.
Futile. That whole Canada First campaign. Hollow, she said, given how much Canada relies on the U.S. market.
And then came the zinger.
Oh, yeah. The pretty explosive suggestion. Why doesn't Canada just become the 51st state?
Wow. You can imagine the reaction.
The text says you could hear gasps. Reporters scribbling like mad.
All sorts of media there, too. Canadian outlets, CBC, Global, CTV, Toronto Star.
And the U.S. side, Breitbart, CNN, Fox, Wall Street Journal, Axios.
Plus those international aides, from the EU, Japan, Australia, just watching.
Taking it all in. What must they have been thinking?
Surprise, maybe concern, wondering about the implications beyond just North America.
So Carney was actually, believe it or not, heading for the exit, maybe thinking the main event was over.
And then Leavitt launches this.
Right. He stops. You can almost picture him like recalibrating for a second. Turns back, walks to the podium, totally composed, adjusts his tie.
That little gesture. Significant.
Yeah. And just holds her gaze. The intensity must have been something else.
That pause from Carney, it's really crucial. It shows he knew this wasn't something to just brush off.
He needed to respond properly.
Right. A calculated decision to face her, to control the narrative, not just react emotionally.
And his response. It was all about the data. No shouting, no rhetoric.
Just facts.
Just the facts. Reminding everyone, hey, this isn't a one-way street. Canada sends 20% of U.S. oil.
A huge amount. And 70% of it's uranium.
70%. And power, electricity for U.S. cities. He was laying out the mutual dependency.
Steadily shifting it, yeah. From Canada relying on the U.S. to, well, we rely on each other.
It changed the dynamic immediately.
It really did. It's insightful. His use of concrete data against her sort of generalizations.
Highlighting what the U.S. actually gets from Canada.
Yeah. Underscoring the potential cost to the U.S. if they push too hard. It forces you to rethink the power balance.
Then a reporter from CBC, I think, asked about Canada First. Like, is this actually uniting the provinces?
Good question. Because unity is key if you're going to stand firm.
And Carney jumped on it. Pointed to Alberta's oil workers, Quebec's manufacturers, Nova Scotia's fishers, all aligned.
Mentioned the First Ministers' Conference, too, right? As proof of that united front.
Yeah. You could almost feel this wave of, like, national pride ripple through the Canadian journalists.
That's a key moment, showing internal strength. Because if you're divided, you're vulnerable.
He used diverse examples, different sectors, different regions, all backing the strategy. It counters that idea of Canada being easy to pressure.
It's a powerful projection of cohesion.
Leavitt tried to downplay it, naturally. Then a Breitbart reporter asked if Canada could really withstand sustained U.S. pressure.
Which is, a common perspective focusing on U.S. economic might.
Leavitt sort of reiterated her point. Canada's economy is tied to the U.S. but it didn't land the same way.
No, her confidence seemed a bit shaken, maybe. The room wasn't quite buying it like before.
Carney had already put that counter-narrative out there. Mutual dependence, Canadian resolve.
The perception had shifted. Her argument, while sticking to the script, just didn't resonate as strongly.
So Leavitt tries to get back on offense. She dismisses Canada's retaliatory tariffs.
Those are the taxes Canada put on U.S. goods, right, in response.
Exactly. Bourbon, steel, things like that. She also dismissed the idea of Canada finding new trade partners in Europe or Asia.
And then she made that really big claim.
Yeah, that the U.S. doesn't need Canadian oil or uranium or electricity anymore.
Which, given how integrated the energy markets are, well, it's a very bold statement.
It seems to ignore the logistics, the reality on the ground.
It felt more like a political message than an economic one, perhaps.
And that's when the CNN reporter asked the perfect follow-up.
The crucial question.
How exactly would the U.S. replace Canadian oil quickly?
Right. And before Leavitt could even answer.
Carney jumps in, armed with specifics, just rattles them off.
The figures. 20% of U.S. crude through pipelines, that's key infrastructure.
70% uranium again. Hydroelectric power. Laying out the potential disruption for U.S. factories. Pow.
It was impactful. That intervention, providing precise data on volume, on delivery of the pipelines, it directly challenges her claim they don't need it.
Makes it very hard to just switch suppliers overnight.
Exactly. Then he drops the other shoe.
Oh, yeah. Canada's already started redirecting exports, oil and gas going to the EU, to Asia.
He mentioned Japan specifically, right? Imports up 15%.
And European ports getting shipments. And the immediate consequence.
U.S. gas prices up 10%.
Within weeks, you could almost feel the temperature change among the U.S. delegation.
And the text mentioned maybe a stifled chuckle from an EU reporter.
I can believe it. Leavitt's composure was definitely starting to crack.
It shows Canada isn't just sitting back. They're being proactive, finding other markets.
Proves they aren't captive to the U.S. market.
And that jump in U.S. gas prices, that's a tangible, politically sensitive consequence right there. Strengthens Carney's hand.
Then a global news reporter asked Carney, okay, but what about the impact on Canada's economy?
Fair question. Is this shift hurting Canada?
But Carney flipped it. Painted a positive picture, strengthening Canadian industries, protecting 60,000 jobs in Alberta.
The oil patch.
New deals with Europe, busier ports, the complete opposite of the doom Leavitt predicted.
He reframed it masterfully. Not about losses, but about gains, about opportunities from diversifying.
Reinforces that idea of Canadian agency resilience.
Leavitt tried calling it a bluff. But then a CTV reporter raised a really important point for Canadians back home.
The cost of living stuff, groceries, rent, gas.
That's where it hits people directly.
And Carney gave, I thought, a pretty direct and thoughtful answer. He acknowledged the concern.
Explain the strategy behind the retaliatory tariffs.
Yeah, targeting specific goods like bourbon from Kentucky, steel from Ohio, hitting key political states.
Applying pressure where it might actually influence U.S. policy.
And he also mentioned investing in relief programs back home to help cushion the blow for Canadians.
It sounded like a properly thought-out two-pronged strategy. Address the external pressure, manage the internal impact.
Shows a sophisticated understanding, really, both the economics and the politics.
And mentioning relief programs helps shore up domestic support, too.
The CNN reporter went back to Leavitt about those rising U.S. gas prices.
Did she have a better answer this time?
Nope. Just brushed it off again. Said Americans are resilient. Canada will suffer more in the end.
But it probably sounded less convincing by then.
Yeah, the text suggests the international A's were looking kind of impressed with Carney's strategic approach.
Her continued downplaying of the impact on U.S. consumers probably wasn't helping her credibility at that point.
Okay, so unable to win on trade, Leavitt pivots to defense.
The burden-sharing argument. Classic move.
Yeah. Accusing the U.S. of subsidizing Canada's security through NATO. Questioning if Canada pulls its weight.
Taps into that ongoing debate within the alliance.
Then the Fox News reporter brings up the 51st state idea again.
But linking it to defense this time.
Exactly. And Leavitt just leaned right into it, basically saying, you rely on our protection, but don't pay your fair share.
It's a pretty pointed challenge. Hits at sovereignty.
But Carney, again, stood his ground.
Yeah.
His response was firm, principled.
Emphasized partnership, right, not colonialism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he listed Canada's contributions. Afghanistan, Ukraine, peacekeeping.
Pointed out the per capita spending in NATO, too.
Which is significant. And he made sure to highlight Arctic security.
A crucial area where Canada plays a unique role.
And interestingly, the text says the Canadian, EU, and Australian reporters actually applauded that.
That's telling. Signals his defense of sovereignty and Canada's contributions resonated widely.
A CTV reporter asked him, okay, how do you maintain sovereignty under this kind of pressure?
Good follow-up. How do you sustain this stance?
And Carney gave this really strong answer. Talked about history, Vimy Ridge, the pandemic response.
Linking past resilience to the present challenge.
And again, emphasized the unity of the provinces, the First Ministers' Conference. A message of resolve.
Using history and current unity as evidence of strength. Powerful rhetoric.
Leavitt tried one more time to undermine him on defense. Suggested the U.S. won't guard Canada's borders for free forever.
Implying Canada needs to spend more or face consequences.
Then an Axios reporter put it to Carney directly. Does Canada's defense ultimately rely on U.S. goodwill?
Ooh, tough question. Cuts right to the heart of the security relationship.
Probes that dependence issue.
But Carney was ready. He brought up NORAD,
Right, the Joint Aerospace Command. And intelligence sharing.
highlighting the mutual benefits. It's not just the U.S. protecting Canada.
He made it clear Canada is an active partner, contributing to continental security.
Not a freeloader, but a fortress. That was the line, wasn't it?
That was the line. Very strong, very memorable, refutes that whole dependency argument.
Asserts Canada's value as a security partner.
Then things took another interesting turn. A reporter from Japan asked something really significant.
What was that?
Could Canada actually lead a trade alliance to counter these U.S. tariffs?
Wow. That suggests a potential major shift in global trade dynamics. Canada stepping up.
And Carney didn't just say maybe. He said it's already happening.
Really?
Yeah. Talked about actively building this free trade network, EU, Japan, Australia.
Pointed to the concrete examples again.
The increased oil to Japan, gas to Europe, and a new MOU signed with the EU for more energy and uranium exports.
So real action, not just aspirational talk, shows commitment to diversifying away from the U.S.
Leavitt tried to dismiss it, but you could just feel the tide had turned in the room.
The momentum was clearly with Carney by this point.
A CBC reporter asked him how he got all the provinces on board with this global strategy. Practical question.
And he talked about consensus, right? BC to Quebec.
Yeah, outlining a plan to protect, I think it was 100,000 jobs and grow Canada's global reach. Sounded like he had solid domestic backing.
That pan-Canadian support is crucial. It reinforces the image of a united front, makes Canada harder to pressure.
Then the Wall Street Journal reporter asked Leavitt if the U.S. was worried about Canada, maybe pivoting towards markets like, well, China.
Introducing another complex layer, how does China fit into this?
Leavitt brushed it off again. But the text notes, an EU aide whispered something approvingly.
Interesting. Suggests maybe different perspectives internationally on Canada's options. The mood had definitely shifted.
Global news followed up with Carney again about the costs back home for average Canadians.
Bringing it back to the domestic impact.
And he answered with empathy, mentioning specific things like tax relief for families, subsidies for small businesses.
Showing they're thinking about cushioning the blow, making sure the strategy works for ordinary people.
The Canadian journalists seemed reassured by that, and the international observers were nodding along.
It enhances his credibility. Shows the Canada First idea isn't just rhetoric, it includes looking after Canadians.
By this stage, Leavitt's attacks just sounded, well, increasingly desperate.
Yeah, it felt like the room wasn't really listening to her in the same way. The dynamic had completely shifted.
So she makes this one last, almost frantic attempt. Accuses Carney of selling out Canada, predicts economic collapse.
Claims Canada would have to go crawling back to Trump for talks.
An Axios reporter asked her if the U.S. was even open to concessions.
And her answer?
Doubled down. Said American unity under Trump would force Canada to its knees.
It's a very political argument, but lacks the substance Carney brought, doesn't it?
Exactly. And then Carney delivered what really felt like the final word, the knockout blow.
How did he respond to that?
Stayed calm, but his voice was just firm, resolute. He talked about Canadian unity, drawing lines from past conflicts right up to today.
Invoking that history again.
Re-emphasized Canada's resource contributions, the oil, the uranium, and the success they were having redirecting exports.
And he mentioned the gas prices again, right?
Yeah. Pointed out the difference, like $5 a gallon in the U.S. at that point.
Ouch. A very relatable consequence for U.S. consumers.
He finished saying Canada first is a promise. Canada wants partnership, but it won't bow to threats. ever.
And the reactions.
Thunderous applause just erupted.
Wow.
And then you had the EU leader, the Japanese official, the Australian minister all go up to Carney afterwards.
And congratulating him publicly.
Yeah, praising Canada's stance, its leadership. Meanwhile, Leavitt was just left, standing there, alone.
That visual says a lot. A real shift in perceived international standing.
A Toronto Star reporter asked Carney for his message to Canadians.
And what did he say?
Keep united, stand tall, emphasize their collective strength. More applause.
Even the Axios reporter, the one who asked that tough question on defense,
Apparently nodded when Carney made his point about defense cooperation, acknowledging the validity.
So Carney clearly won the room and arguably the international narrative that day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then as the applause died down, Carney, looking much more relaxed,
Drops the Tim Hortons line.
yes, that iconic Canadian coffee chain, says Canada's open for trade, not a takeover.
Perfect. Culturally resonant, adds a touch of humor after all that tension.
The room just burst out laughing, especially the Canadians. Someone even yelled out a double-double order.
Brilliant. Encapsulates that Canadian spirit, Navy. Resilience with a bit of good humor.
Carney leaves looking confident. Leavitt just slips out quietly. Total contrast.
And the final twist. The photo.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
Someone snapped a picture of Leavitt standing alone, posted it on X.
And it went viral.
Instantly. #LonelyLeavitt.
Oh, wow. Social media amplifying the whole narrative.
The reaction online was huge. Maple Pride, Northern Star, Northern Resolve, all trending.
Filled with maple leaf emojis and Tim Hortons references, I bet.
You guessed it.
Mhm.
And major news outlets, CBC, CTV, even the BBC, ran headlines about Carney's firm stand, Canadian unity.
It clearly resonated deeply, didn't it? Especially for Canadians maybe feeling economic pressure. A moment of national pride.
It really felt like a significant moment. So wrapping up, the key takeaways for you.
Canada really stood its ground against pretty intense U.S. pressure on trade.
They didn't just talk about diversifying trade, they actually started doing it strategically, redirecting resources.
And that provincial unity, which can sometimes be elusive, it seemed genuinely solid this time.
Right, and Prime Minister Carney managed to project this image of, well, strength and resolve effectively on the world stage.
We saw some surprising facts laid bare, too, didn't we? Like the extent of U.S. reliance on Canadian resources.
Yeah, the oil, the uranium figures were eye-opening.
And the speed with which Canada moved to secure new trade deals with Europe and Asia, that was noteworthy.
Definitely provided those aha moments. Showed how even in a seemingly unbalanced relationship, strategic action and unity can make a difference.
So for you, our listener, trying to get a quick, thorough handle on this complex event.
We hope this deep dive gave you that clear overview of what went down in Brussels and, maybe more importantly, why it mattered.
And it leaves us with some big questions to ponder, doesn't it?
For sure.
What are the long-term implications of this shift, this apparent change in the Canada-U.S. dynamic?
And what about these new global alliances forming? What does that mean for international trade, for diplomacy down the road?
Definitely things worth keeping an eye on, exploring further as events continue to unfold. Something for you to mull over.